So usually we speak on the Parsha of the week, but since that this Parsha Nosoy is actually going to be repeated again next week, and we're so close to Shavuoiss, so we'll focus on Shavuoiss a little bit. We'll discuss the principle of Matan Torah. Right. Shavuoiss, the halacha is that Shavuoiss is in certain ways even superior to all other Yom Tovim. Greater. As for instance, you know that Yom Tov you're supposed to celebrate by a feast. You have to eat. That's part of the celebration of Yom Tov. That's true of Shabbos, of course. You're not allowed to fast on Shabbos. Yet, there are some exceptions where you're allowed to fast on Shabbos. And you're allowed to fast on Yom Tov. Oh, 15 minutes. There are certain cases and exceptions where a person, if he feels relieved, if he is very anxious for certain things that happened and he wants to fast to alleviate the problem, he's allowed to, even on Shabbos. One occasion where it's allowed is what's called Tainis Cholom. Tainis Cholom means when a person has a certain kind of a dream that's pressing on him, and he wants to fast to neutralize the effects of the dream. A form of prayer. It's allowed to on Shabbos, because under these circumstances, fasting gives him greater satisfaction than eating. Therefore it's allowed to. It's an interesting thing that the person in fact fasts on Shabbos in this situation, then he has to fast another time to atone for the fact that he fasted on Shabbos. But nevertheless he was allowed to fast on Shabbos. Shavuoiss is an exception to this, but Shavuoiss you're not allowed to fast under any circumstance. Shavuoiss you must eat to celebrate the Yom Tov of Shavuoiss. So the Rebbe asks a very interesting question. All other Yom Tovim holidays have to do with our spiritual well-being, but also with our physical well-being. Like Pesach, we were taken out of Egypt, taken out of Mitzrayim, we were brought from Klippa to Kedusha, but also physically we were redeemed from slavery into freedom. So we're celebrating also our physical salvation. Sukkot, similarly, the Sukkah is to commemorate our journey through the desert, where we were protected with the heavenly clouds, Adonai HaKovet, against all elements. The Sukkah is the commemoration of these clouds. That was also a physical physical grant. something that helped us physically. The only holiday that represents exclusively a spiritual experience, a spiritual gift, is Shavuoiss. Shavuoiss is Matan Torah, the giving of a Torah, exclusively spiritual. And yet, on all other holidays, we can, if by exception, we can have to fast. Shavuoiss, which is supposed to be the most spiritual of all holidays, you're not allowed to fast. You must eat. Seems to be an odd phenomenon. Rabbi explains it, and we are going to delve into this. And then, of course, as we usually do, try to draw something practical, something insight directly pertinent to ourselves. The Rebbe explains in simple terms that in reality, Torah scholarship, and even the practice of mitzvahs, not as mitzvahs, or as commands from Hashem, but just simply the practice of them, existed before Matan Torah. Everybody knows that. The Gemara says that Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov learned Torah, and the Shvatim, the tribes, learned Torah. Even in Mitzrayim, the Shevet Levi continued to learn Torah. Throughout the time, throughout all the years, since our national birth, we even learned Torah. So what was so novel about Matan Torah, the giving of Torah? The Gemara tells us that when Moshe Rabbeinu went up on the mountain, went up above the Gan Eden to receive the Torah. So the Malachim, the angels, saw Moshe amongst them. And they said, what is this human being doing amongst us? Well, how has he come here? And Hashem said to them that he came to receive the Torah. So the Malachim protested and says, what? You're giving the Torah to human beings? We are more suitable to get the Torah than human beings. So Hashem said to Moshe that he should respond to the Malach. He should give him an answer. And Moshe Rabbeinu said, okay. What does it say in the Torah? It says to Rabbeinu, what does it say in the Torah? Hashem said, it says in the Torah, Anoichi Hashem Elokecha asher tzisicha me'eretz Mitzrayim. I am your God who took you out of the land of Mitzrayim. So Moshe turns to the Malachim and he said, were you ever in Mitzrayim? Then he turns and says, what else does it say in the Torah? It says in the Torah, you shouldn't have other gods, you shouldn't serve idols. So it turns to Malachim. You live among idol worshippers? You can be confused with idols? Then he says, what else did it say? It says, you should honor your father and your mother. Turns to Malachim, do you have a father and a mother to honor? He goes through the entire.
Can they use Hashem as an example of who their father?
And this was his answer to the Malach. Okay, you sure? You understand?
I'm sorry.
You understand the answer that Moshe gave them? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
How they,
What is the significance? What's behind this answer? This is not just a superficial, technical answer. This Indian that Eden were in Mitzrayim, and that Eden are in the world where idol worship is a possibility, and that Eden have a father and a mother, and it's possible to honor your father and mother and to dishonor your father and mother, and everything else. This is a primary principle in Torah. The fact that it's possible to be the opposite, and you are establishing the correct way through your own effort. Not something that is there automatically. This is a principle in Torah. For this reason, the Torah was given. What is so significant in this? Why can't we have a straightforward, godly world? But there are no controversies. There's no Mitzrayim, there's no idol worshiping, there's no possibility of anything contrary to godliness, and have a life of bliss. So to explain this, we will approach it from several angles. First, directly what the Rebbe says, in particular in that Sikha, that the principle, the aim, the objective of Torah is to create a dira lo yisborich. Most of you may have heard this expression. A dwelling place for God. A dira. What is the meaning of a dira? What is a dwelling place? How do you find a dwelling place? A dwelling is that which surrounds the person. But that which surrounds a person could be at many various levels. For instance, a person wears a coat, a jacket, it also goes around the person. But there's a principal difference between the dira surrounding the person and the jacket surrounding the person. The difference is that a jacket surrounds a person, it's made to his measure, and it identifies each one of his limbs. Like you have a sleeve for the right hand, you have a sleeve for the left hand, and you have the part that covers your body. And the same thing of every other piece of garment. It applies directly to certain parts of the person. Whereas a house, a dira, does not distinguish between different parts of the person. A dira accommodates the entire person as one. This principle that accommodates the entire person as one is not just merely because the dira is bigger than the person, but because the dira actually relates to the very essence of the person.
How so?
In terms of the usage, in terms of the effect of a dira, let's say, on a person versus everything else. Now we know that there are many things that are primary, of greatest importance to a person. Starting from air, which is the most important, water, food, garment, and lodging. 5 different levels. And I would think, and it's true, that this is in order of importance, in order of urgency. A person, God forbid, is missing air, he can hardly survive any duration of time. Water is next in urgency. Food is next in urgency to that. Garments is next to that, and lodging is next to that.
What about Hashem?
All important. So, from this perspective, we would say that lodging has the least effect on the person because it's least important, right? On the other hand, people reflect on the overall effect on the person. If a person is missing any of these things, yes, it's crucial. Air is absolutely crucial. Water is absolutely crucial. Food. When the person is hungry, say for instance, God forbid anybody should be hungry, or thirsty, or lacking clothing. Each one of these things affects a person in a specific way. A person is hungry, so he's hungry. Thirsty, he's specifically thirsty. If he's lacking a garment, so he's cold, he's too hot, he's uncomfortable. But there is a specific and narrowly definable aspect that he is missing as a result.
Thank you.
Everybody understands what I'm saying? There's a specific thing that he's missing. He's hungry, he's thirsty, he's cold, whatever it is. A person who's homeless, God forbid, he's not missing. He can sleep under a bridge. He can sleep in a cave, under a bench, whatever. So you say he's not lacking. He can survive. On the one hand, he can survive. On the other hand, he's not a person. He's not a human being. He doesn't have a place in the world. So it cannot be identified with a specific need. And on the other hand, he is lacking altogether the human definition of what a human being is. If he doesn't have a home, doesn't have a place to be. So this illustrates to us that a dira cannot be identified logically. What is so important about a dira? It is something which is really beyond logic. It is something that applies, that refers to the essence of the human being. Beyond the specific need. Similarly, a person who does have a dira, and everybody with Hashem's help has a dira, and in a dira he has various places, closets, rooms, various things that he had, so to speak, spread out in his home. He's not necessarily benefiting and using every part of the dira all the time. But every part of the dira affects him. Every part of the dira defines the fact that he is comfortable and he's got everything spread out. His books are in this place, are in place. His food is in place. His garments are in place. and so forth. Even though a person may have a library and he uses certain books of the library quite level seldom. Nevertheless, it defines a person. It makes him into a human being. What is the effect? What happens in this? How does the dira have that effect on the person? After all, it's separate from the person. He's not dressing, he's not putting his feet into the pants. He doesn't put his, like a garment that surrounds him and gives him a certain view and a certain appearance and a comfort. And this is where precisely the significance of a dira is. That it is something which is completely separate from the person. Totally separate. And as such, it provides him with a place in the world. That he becomes really a member, so to speak, a citizen. He becomes founded. He has a real place in the world. Without the dira, he's also the same human being, but he doesn't have a place in the world. With the dira, he has a real place. And having a real place, other than that which he makes for himself, that which is provided to him by the world, that makes him real in the world. In other words, it has to come from something separate from him, from outside. And this is what gives him his whole essence, his whole essential presence in the world. The principle that we say, that Torah and mitzvahs, is for the purpose of making a dira for Hashem, is expressed in these words, making a dira, in order to allude to the same concept that we described now. Now this is a world that is, in essence, as you look at it, is devoid of godliness. You don't see godliness in it. You see a world. Something completely different, separate from Hashem. Like we said, there's Mitzrayim, there's idols, there's all kinds of things in here. Something completely separate. And when we transform this place and allow God to come into this place, then what we are inviting into this place by transforming it is not one aspect of godness or another. Like we said, by human being, his seichel, his midas, his qualities, his arms, his legs. What we are inviting there is the very presence and the essence of Hashem himself. This is what a dira is. And this is what Moshe Rabbeinu answered to the Malachim, that the whole purpose of Torah is to make a dira for Hashem in a place that is completely outside of him, separate. And that doesn't exist by Malachim. They don't have a Yetzer Hara, they don't have a Mitzrayim, they don't have the idols, they don't have anything. By them, the union of godliness they can accept directly, smoothly. This is basically, briefly, the explanation that the Rebbe gives in that sikh. And the Rebbe concludes that therefore, this is why Shavuoiss you're not allowed to fast, even though other holidays you're allowed to fast if you need to, because Shavuoiss you have to emphasize what the essence of the Torah is. The essence of the Torah is that Torah should be in the physical world, not just the concept of goodness and justice, but in the physical world. Therefore, it has to be celebrated in the physical world by eating and drinking. Having said that, I want to discuss this concept a little bit. We know that in Torah there are three levels, three different categories of mitzvahs. There is what's called mishpatim, which are civil laws. There are eidos. Eidos are like commemorative mitzvahs like Shabbos, Yom Tov, Shavuoiss, Sukkot. And then there are chukim. Chukim means decrees that are unrelated to world at all. They're clearly God's commands. This is what God wants. Now, we've discussed in the past, you have to understand that even though that there are mishpatim in Torah, there are civil laws, laws that guide us how we behave in the world. But these themselves have to be understood from a Torah perspective. Why did God have to give us these laws? Why did God have to say, don't rob, don't steal, don't kill? It's obvious in the world you shouldn't rob and kill and steal. If you are not careful with these simple civil principles, civilization falls apart. You can't live next to your neighbor. Everything falls apart. People live like cannibals. So why do we need these laws in the Torah? And the answer, of course, is that these very same laws, as they are in the Torah, they represent a totally different concept than the way they are understood in the world. In the world, as we said before, this is simply a principle that allows the world to function. It's a logical thing. But if you, say for instance, take a simple thing, you have red light. If there are no red lights, or you don't stop at a red light, then you're endangering yourself, endangering the other person who's crossing your street. So it's logical that you should stop at the red light, to make it possible for people to get around. And this applies across the board to all civil laws. So that these civil laws actually are definable from within the world itself. As they are presented in the Torah, they are making a totally different statement. And the statement is that if you want God to be present in the world, not that the world should operate safely and properly. But in order for God to be able to be present in the world, you have to keep these laws. These laws are inviting God into the world, not providing for a safe running of the world itself. It bypasses the entire concept of worldliness per se. So that if you steal, then it is not merely that you are disrupting the proper civil operation of the world. What you are doing is you are pushing, so to speak, off the godly presence from the world. You're saying, I'm disregarding this principle. I don't care if God goes away. I want to live in the world naturally. So that these laws now, after Matan Torah, represent a totally different concept. This constitutes, at the time of Matan Torah, constitutes a fundamental change in the way, in the world, and the way Hashem and God was represented in the world. Before Matan Torah, there was also, as we say, there was Torah. They always studied Torah, and there were mitzvahs, they did good things, and they lived their decent lives. They lived decent lives only on the basis of the fact that they're human beings, and there are certain human principles that is naturally demanded of the human being. So this simply substantiated the human principle, presence in the world. And like we said, the same thing, that it's logical that people should behave properly so that they would allow each other, allow the society to develop and flourish. Nothing to do with God. Let us take a simple illustration of the concept, so we'll understand what this is about. Let's say you're invited to somebody's house to be a guest. Come for a supper, or come for a Shavuoiss meal. You come for a Shavuoiss meal, and the man gives you your plate of food and goes away. Lets you eat. I give you your food. What else do you want? You're not hungry. He goes away. He's got other things to do. Are you being a guest? You're being insulted. It's insignificant. What, did I come to you for food? What, am I a scavenger or something? I came to you as a guest. Where are you going? One of the principles of being a guest is that you're welcomed by the host. You sit around together. He shows you that he appreciates your presence, your company, or whatever it is. But if he goes away and lets you eat by yourself, it's exactly the same food. Exactly, nothing changed.
Not feel something.
Huh?
Not feel the same thing, I guess.
Sorry?
You don't feel like...
But you have anything. This is what the world was like before Matan Torah. There were everything in the world. It could be even laws and justice and right and wrong and good and bad, everything. But there was no host. There was no sense of it. It was all for the personal comfort of the person. Life was what's called make-believe. What make-believe means? Make-believe. You it's like children playing army. They make believe that they have an army. Make believe that you're really celebrating. Something is really happening. But the whole thing that's happening is that with your experience, you have the right food, you have your clothes, you have your things, but nothing really is happening. What's the purpose? What is it all about? It's a make-believe world. It's a world without a head, without a creator. So it has its ingredients, it has its structure. It has the trees, it has the animals, it has the human beings, it has everything. But nothing real. Coming back, in the same example, like we say, that the host is inviting you and he's sitting with you. If he's sitting with you and you're eating together, then the food itself changes its significance. Then the significance of eating at this table is not the food, but it is eating together with your host. That's what's significant then. Being with your host becomes more significant than the food itself. Right? Do you understand that? This is what happened at Matan Torah. You should not kill, you should not steal, you should not rob. It's obvious you should not do all these things. But there's a fundamental difference whether this is simply in order to accommodate the possibility of living in the world, or in order to accommodate the host, the creator of the world, that he should be here and with you. Torah and mitzvahs are inviting Hashem into the world to be with us. It's not inviting. Hashem said, by giving us the Torah, He said that I'm coming down to be with you. Before that, as I said, there was also the same thing. You can also do exactly the same thing, but it would be a make-believe world, not real. Everything is make-believe. By extension, okay, so this is things, laws that we can understand, like civil laws. But by extension, the same thing extends itself to all other mitzvahs. Like we put on tefillin every day. Putting on tefillin cannot be understood from a worldly perspective at all. There's no way to explain what are you doing when you're putting on tefillin. There is no physical, worldly effect by this action. What then is it? Putting on tefillin is representing that Hashem is here with you. That's what tefillin is. When you put on tefillin, you're saying that Hashem is here, and I recognize it in my heart, and I recognize it in my head. That's what tefillin is. I recognize Hashem's presence. The same thing, Shabbos. Shabbos is representing and is commemorating and actually representing the actual continuous fact that Hashem creates the world in 6 days, and the 7th day is a higher plane in the world. This is all has to do with Hashem's presence in the world. Just to provide, this is what is grossly misunderstood and misinterpreted and misused, and say, oh, Shabbos is a wonderful thing. How smart the Jewish people are that they thought that the human being has to rest one day a week. How wise. This is completely misunderstanding of what Shabbos is. Shabbos is not a day of rest, as so to speak, in the world, they count a cycle. Shabbos represents, again, Hashem's presence in our lives, and represents Hashem's presence in the world. So that in the 6 days, and the entire cycle of 7, we are constantly aware, not of world, but of the creator of the world. We are aware that what is world? World is Hashem's creation. This is what its value is. Again, back to our host and guest. What is the value of this plate of food? The host, not the food. What is the value of the world that I'm living in? The fact that Hashem is there. This is what gives it significance and meaning. Otherwise, I'm just fooling myself. I tell myself I'm living, and then it's just going from day to day to day to day until the time passes. Nothing happens. So this is the central significance of the Inyan of Shavuoiss and Matan Torah. Matan Torah is a pshat that Hashem gave us what's called Nosoy, His Torah. Not the Torah that drives the world and allows the world to function properly, but the Torah that allows God to be in the world. This is the Matan Torah. This is what we got at Matan Torah. This is what elevated us to be in a unique position amongst all the other nations. All other nations in the world, they can live decent lives and do all the right things. But they remain essentially the guest without a host. They eat the food and they have everything that's there. But they don't have the host. They live in the world. And everything that they do remains in the world. And they're obligated by the 7 mitzvahs of Noach requires that they live a decent life and not destroy the world. Essentially, that's what the 7 mitzvahs represent. That they are supposed to safeguard the world. That the world shouldn't be destroyed. But it is within the worldly context. There's a sikha where the Rebbe explains what happened in the flood. The flood, Noach's flood. So the Posik says that Molo ha'oretz chomos mipneya, that the earth is filled with robbery, with dishonesty. Rashi says over there, if you would look, that actually the human beings and the people were completely perverted. Their whole lives are perverted. Perverted means crooked, not natural, not normal. And there was sin on top of sin, and people completely abnormal. An interesting thing, there is a Mefurish I once saw who says that they find these remains, these fossils of dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are animals that don't exist today. Huge animals, completely disproportionate to the type of animals that normal animals that we see. In all kinds of different ways, in size and in ferocity, and the appearance is also very, very awesome. Where is it? On that basis, this is what they call evolution and so forth. So he says an interesting thing. He says it is known that when two different species interbreed, then the result is an unnatural, abnormal creature of disproportionate size, because it's an unnatural relation. It creates a creature that is half this and half this, and it goes out of all proportion in terms of its size and ferocity. So he says that it's conceivable that all of these abnormal, unnatural animals that they're finding fossils of is a result, because before the flood, before the marble, that's exactly what happened. Animals that's completely unnatural, animals interbred with other species. It's totally abnormal, unnatural. The whole world was rotten. That's what rotten, perverted. So the whole world was perverted. And then it says, that the earth was filled with robbery, with dishonesty. So the Rebbe asked a question. He says, robbery and dishonesty, even, robbing and so forth, that's a justification for killing. You don't kill a robber. A robber, you make him pay up, you put him in jail, whatever, but don't kill. It doesn't justify you. The punishment has to be commensurate to the crime. So how come they were wiped off? And Rashi says over there that despite all the perversion that occurred, the final decree came as a result of this chomos, of this robbery, that the civilized life was destroyed. The Rebbe says, what's the explanation of that? So he explains that there are two aspects in chomos. One is that this person robbed from this person, so he has to pay him up. Another is that if you rob and becomes rampant, rampant means becomes widespread, then what you have is a complete destruction of civil society, destruction of the world. There's no world. The flood did not represent a punishment for their actions, because the actions per se did not deserve this kind of punishment. The flood represented that there is no world. It was so perverted and so destroyed that there was nothing to save. So the 7 mitzvahs the obligation is that every person in the world is obligated to preserve the welfare and the health of the world. God created the world and gave you a chance to benefit from it, and you have to really know that this is not your world to destroy. This is principle.
What the second concept of robbery? I didn't understand the second concept of robbery.
That it destroys civil society. It's not just this action against this action. It makes life in the world impossible.
Everybody's doing this.
Everybody is doing it. So there's no life, no world.
Hashem would leave them like this, they would kill themselves, like destroy.
Well, they would kill themselves. Hashem wants to have a world. Hashem doesn't want just the... So you saw that this has to be wiped off because this is unsalvageable. The whole thing just fell apart and start from scratch. The more profound reality in this, since we touched on this, I want to point out that what happened then was Hashem created the world. And it was a world full of blessing. It was extremely fertile. There was everything in abundance. It says even that the taste of fruit then was much richer than the taste that we have. Everything was in great abundance, great blessing. Because this is how Hashem created. Human beings came to the world and they saw there's so much pleasure and so much gratification a person can have. They did not pay attention at all to where it come from, what is it for, and how do you preserve it. They weren't concerned. It's just there. It's God's world. Who cares? And they were just taking it in. And that's how they destroyed the world. Then came the flood, and a new world was created. How was the new world created?
It was empty, nothing.
No, but how was it recreated?
No.
It was saved by a human being. It was saved by a human being, so human beings then knew that the world depends on them to preserve. It's not just there. It's their thing. It's their thing. Either they preserve it or they destroy it. And they had a sense, this is something which you have to be responsible for. So after all that, there was still plenty of problems in the world, but nevertheless, never to the extent that happened before the Mama. There was always that part in the world that was still guarded. There were always some. If people became decadent in one place, in another place, they said, no, we have to have a decent society. It's interesting. The Medrash tells us that when Hashem told Abraham, Lech Lecha, you should go to the land that I will show you. And Hashem didn't tell him which land. Just go. Right? You know about that. And Abraham went. And he went and he went and he went. He was looking for the land. Where did Hashem mean that he should stop? Where should he look? And then he came to Eretz Canaan. And what did he see in Eretz Canaan? In those days, it was still before they were completely sinful. What did he see in Eretz Canaan? He saw people working from daybreak to sunset, tilling the land. So people working, being industrious, and he said, that's the land I want to settle. That's the place I want to be. When people are working hard from daybreak to sunset, this is in other words, this is a productive place. This is not a place of lazy people who are just reaping the fat of the land. That's an interesting medrash that says that. So the point is that in the world, there is an obligation in the world to preserve the world and develop it and so forth. This is true regarding all the nations, and that remains for all time. The Jewish people were given a Torah, and the significance of giving a Torah is what we discussed before, that they were taken out of that cycle of worldly development, and their principle is the godly presence in the world. so that they actually have the host at the table, not just the food. This is the principle of Matan Torah. To keep the host in place here, to keep inviting him. For this you have to keep Torah mitzvahs. You have to eat kosher and keep Shabbos, put on tefillin. This is what we accomplish. This is what gives us a different reality in our lives than other nations. This is why, because the union that Matan Torah, that Torah is something that cannot be explained in worldly terms. What is my benefit from the Torah? I want to live in the world. The Yetzer Hara, the Shabbami says, I just want to have the comfort of the world. This is why, to receive the Torah, you have to have a special encouragement, special inspiration. The Rebbe's bracha was always that they should receive the Torah b'simcha, with joy. When you receive the Torah with joy, then you're able to receive it and appreciate it and recognize it's the great gift of Torah. So the Rebbe should help that each one of us should prepare themselves and should receive the Torah with great joy, and then it will be b'pnimius, then it will have its proper effect, and it will elevate us. Like it says by the Orin HaKoy, the Orin, when the Levim carried the Orin, they carried all parts of the Mishkan, and they also carried the Orin. So the Orin also had poles, which they carried it. But the Gemara says the Orin was different than all other kelim. The other kelim, they actually had to carry them, and they had weight. The Orin carried its carriers. The Orin needs to be carried. It seemed that they were carrying, but really the Orin carried its carriers. So we receive the Torah, and we think that we are carrying the Torah, but really the Torah carries us. Torah uplifts us and gives us the spirit and gives us the real meaningful life and inspiration and koiches and strength to carry, to live and to be in the way we should be. So now Freilich and Yontiv. And I presume you're going to stay up the first night. It shouldn't be difficult. It should be b'simcha. It should be with joy. And that way we prepare us to receive the Torah.